So, Grandma, I'm going to do an interview with you.
Okay.
What was it like living in Austria just before the war?
Well, my father was quite well off. He had a big watchmaker shop, the biggest watchmaker jeweller's shop in Vienna, and we had a big flat, and and I went on holidays in the countryside, and I didn't have any brothers and sisters. I was an only child, but I think I had a nice life in Austria.
Cool.
And that went on till I was 9 years old.
So then, was that when the war started?
The war, I was still 9 when...
I mean, like, Austrian against Germany invading Austria.
That's it. When I was 9 years old, we had to leave Austria because we were Jewish.
Yeah.
We weren't much involved in the Jewish religion, but we were Jewish. And there was a big program because Hitler annexed Austria. Hitler took it over, and so he made life very difficult for Jewish people. I had to leave my school. Jewish people couldn't go to school anymore. And when I went out in the street, I had to wear a big
Star?
star
Yeah.
on my sleeve.
Yellow star.
And it was all very uncomfortable. And then there was talk that it was going to be very dangerous for Jewish people to stay in Austria, which it turned out to be.
Did you have to leave your school as well?
I did have to leave my school. Yeah, I couldn't go to school anymore.
You had to go to a Jewish school, didn't you?
No, my parents found a little Montessori school, as it was a private school, so it didn't have to stick to the rules. So in my last year, or probably, I went to this little Montessori school.
Okay.
But I had to leave my primary school where I'd been before.
Years.
And so we left Austria because it was going to be dangerous. All the Jews who stayed there got put in concentration camps.
Okay, is that all?
That's all about Austria. So you want to know about when I got to England?
Okay, so yeah, so these are these are table mats from is my grandma's dad's clock shop. So what was it? Am I right in saying that you had caught the last train to be like taken out of Austria?
Yeah, that's quite right. We had to pack up all our things because we were quite well off, and we had a load of things in our flat, the carpets and all the rest of our equipment. We packed it up into an enormous big box and were told it would be sent on to us, but we never saw any of it again. And all we were allowed to take is a couple of suitcases and very little money, and we got a train out of Austria. We were planning to stay in Holland for a couple of days and then go on to England.
So did you have relatives in Holland?
Yeah, I had an aunt. We had an aunt. My mother's sister lived in Holland, and we went to stay with her for a couple of days. Holland wasn't yet taken over by Hitler. Holland wasn't conquered by Hitler in those days. Yeah. So we got on this train, and we found out later that the next train after ours was turned back. So if we'd caught the later train, I would never have got to England. My family would never have got to England, and we would have pretty certainly ended up in a concentration camp. So that was very lucky.
And we wouldn't be here right now talking about what it was like.
Quite right. And you wouldn't be here now either, because I would never have married your dad. And
Granddad.
your granddad. I would never have married your granddad, and I would never have had your mum. And
My mum would never met my dad because she wouldn't be there.
And you wouldn't be here at all.
Nope.
So lucky we caught that train.
That, definitely. Yeah. So
then we went to Holland, and again we got a boat to England. It was very rare for people to go in aeroplanes in those days.
obviously, because they weren't very, like, they didn't carry many people then, did they?
No. And we got to England, and we got a train to London. And when we got to the station in London, it was full of children. There was
Evacuees, right?
absolutely masses of children on every platform.
They were evacuees, right?
That's right. All the children, as we went into London, all the children in London were going out of London. And
That must have been a bit scary. I think they were going.
and there I was a little girl of 9 years old. I was a bit surprised and
Were you a bit worried because you thought you'd come to the wrong place?
yeah, that kind of thing, yeah. And then we went to stay with these people who'd invited us to England. We couldn't have got into England if we didn't have somebody who invited us. And that night we went to bed, and when I got up the next morning, everybody was crowded round the radio, the wireless, because there wasn't television.
Yeah.
And like my parents and the people whose house we were staying in, all crowded round the radio. And I know it wasn't actually the king that announced the beginning of the war, but
The Prime Minister, right?
it was the Prime Minister, but I don't remember hearing the Prime Minister. What I remember hearing was the king. And it was, what I remember is that he had a stutter, that king, and he said, war between England and Germany is declared this morning. So that was
That must be a bit of a surprise, mustn't it?
it was, yeah, it was extraordinary. The very next morning after I got to England, war was declared.
Mm.
So,
Okay. So, what was it like living in London at the war with all the ants and shelters and bombs and everything?
well, soon after we got to England, of course, the war was declared, and it wasn't long before we knew that England was going to get bombed. So the first thing was the government gave all the families who had houses and gardens sheets of corrugated tin.
Oh, you read about this, didn't you?
And I remember helping my father. They were called Anderson shelters, Macon Anderson shelter. For some reason they thought this would keep us. Well, it would be safer than staying in a house.
Yeah, it probably would be.
Because the thing about a house is, even if it didn't have a direct hit, if it had a hit next door or just in the garden outside,
It would have caught fire.
it would have caught fire, and also all the rubble. You'd be You'd be buried under the weight of the roof and the walls and everything. So they thought we'd be safer out in the garden, sheltering under this corrugated tin.
It doesn't sound right.
But the thing is, my mother particularly used to panic because you could hear the bombs falling down. and then a big crash. And she would, and my memory is that she would scream every time she heard a bomb coming down. And before, the air raid was always announced. The air raids were always in the night. So we'd put our night dress on, wrap ourselves in blankets, go out to the Anderson shelter,
Yeah.
and listen to the bombs all night, and my mum panicking.
So, did the Anderson shelters actually protect you?
Well, we never had a direct hit, luckily, either on the shelter or on the house.
Yeah,
but
shelter will probably be too small.
My dad was got a bit fed up with all this, and after a little while, we didn't go to the Anderson shelter anymore. We went to a tube station, one of the really deep tube stations, and we slept on the platform. There were hundreds of Londoners doing this, going, and I don't know which one, but some of the tube stations are really deep, and no bomb would ever hurt us while we were down there. And you can imagine, you know what it's like, a tube station. The platform up to midnight, when there were trains still running, we all had to crowd. There was a sort of line. They drew a line halfway along the platform. People who were travelling on the trains could have the front of the line, and all of us who were sleeping, they were all crowded together. Then after midnight, we could spread out. There weren't sleeping bags. People hadn't properly invented sleeping bags. What we brought along was blankets, loads of blankets, and my mum made a little picnic, sandwiches and things. So we'd spread out and sleep on the platform. Hundreds and hundreds of people, all sleeping on the platform.
Yeah.
Every night.
Okay.
Hard for a little night.
Very awkward if you wanted to go to the loo.
Yeah. So what was it like being squeezed out with all those people?
Well, I mean, for me, I was still with my parents, and it was better than the Anderson shelter because you couldn't hear the bombs falling. Before
and your mum didn't scream.
Yeah, my mum didn't scream. And in a way it was a bit of an adventure, you know. You go out every night, instead of going up to your bedroom to bed, you'd get on a bus and go to the tube station and have a picnic. And my memory is that I used to actually be able to sleep all right, but when the
Sorry, can I just hold a second? Can you pass me a bit of paper?
Mum,
What?
thanks a lot.
It doesn't matter. No one's going to see this. It's just to get the information, isn't it? Put it on pause.
So yeah, carry on.
yeah.
You were an interruption.
Sorry.
Yeah, before an air raid started, the siren would go. That would go, ooh, lots louder, of course. And they'd set the sirens off when they saw the bombers approaching the coast. And London was always a target. Of course, there were quite a lot of other parts of England were the target, but London always was. And that's when we'd want to be sure to be in the underground shelter, at the underground station by then. And I felt, you know, for me it was a little bit of an adventure.
Yeah.
In a way, then the all clear would sound in the morning, and that wouldn't go up and down, ooh. It would be more, ooh. And we'd all come up and it would be early in the morning, just getting dawn. And I used to quite enjoy that in a way. But of course it was always a little bit scary in case when we got to our house where we were living, in case that had got bombed in the night, because you never knew if it would be or wouldn't be. And also we passed other houses. Now when a house was bombed, sometimes it was like, it looked like sheared in half, and you'd see it like a doll's house, the rooms, the bath, the front wall had collapsed, but some of the rooms were still there. So you'd see it like a doll's house with the front open. You'd go past all these houses where you'd see the bedroom, the sitting room, the bathroom, the kitchen. And sometimes, of course, you'd see heaps and heaps of rubble. And I don't remember seeing dead bodies, but there must have been.
Yeah, probably hidden under the rubble.
Yeah. Well, there'd be air raid wardens trying to deal with emergencies.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I think we need... It's probably a little bit long, this, because it's
Yeah.
only like one page.
Yeah.
So perhaps you
Yeah.
move on to sort
Yeah.
of...
Well,
So, how's your life different from my life now? Like, how do you entertain yourself with bombs falling and everything, and anything like that sort of thing?
well, it was very different because, for instance, you spend a lot of time, not a lot of time, but you do spend time watching television, playing computer games.
Actually, I do spend a lot of time doing that.
All those things didn't exist. And England went through a very difficult time. Do you realise that England could have lost the war?
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
was
definitely.
quite on the books, because Germany had already conquered some other big important countries like France.
Yeah.
France fell to Germany. Nearly all of Europe had been overrun by the Nazis. And it was very, very possible that England might have actually lost the war.
Yeah.
Just think of that. That would have made a lot of difference to everything.
Definitely.
And England was very poor. We couldn't, all the money that England could possibly get together, all the goods went into the war effort, into funding the soldiers, making the ammunition, making the tanks, and so on.
We've been learning about that, haven't we?
And also, the ships weren't safe. The ships that used to bring in goods to England could no longer do it. So there was rationing. We couldn't go out and buy sweets.
Yeah.
We had a ration of 2 ounces of sweets. I don't know if you can imagine. A bar of chocolate was unheard of. I had some American cousins came to stay, were drafted to England when America came into the war. Some American soldiers came and stayed in where I was living, and because we moved out of London later on. I won't go into all that. And they gave me, as there I was, their poor little English cousin, or living in England cousin, and they brought me bars of chocolate, and I was absolutely amazed. So all we got was 2 ounces of sweets.
You never had chocolate before?
I had chocolate, and in Austria I'd had chocolate, and and occasionally,
But not in ages.
but not for ages. And 2 ounces of sweets is next to nothing. Also, you couldn't get fresh eggs, so people couldn't make cakes the way they used to. A fresh egg was a luxury, absolute luxury. We had stuff like dried eggs, to make things with.
That's not very nice, is it?
It was difficult. So, it was such a different life. Yet the life you lead is so completely different from mine.
Yeah.
And yet, I suppose, we had the same. An 11-year-old is an 11-year-old. And I had friends and fell out with them and had, that kind of thing that's the same for you.
But how did the war affect you emotionally?
Well, for one thing, it affected me particularly because we were we were a good family in Austria. We had a good life and we had enough money and so on. And I could go on holidays and all kinds of things. So when I came to England, I was a little poor girl. And we never had, and my family never had a place of our own to live in anymore. We always lived with other people. So that made a big difference to me emotionally. I suppose we children still had fun. I remember my friends and I going and finding a bit of wasteland and building little dens and the kind of things children play. We still had fun. We played games. We went to school when you're about to start secondary school. I went to secondary school. We had lessons, usual sort of lessons.
So, in one word, how would you describe the war?
One word. It was just life. When I was a child, I didn't know anything different.
I said one word.
Oh, you can't.
I'm joking. Yeah, so